everybody, this is Shay. I want to do another Photoshop demo for you, kind of going with the approach we're building on this semester in this class, where we start with a sketch or a drawing and then take it to the painting stage. Now for character design, your sketches might have been pretty loose, but this is one that would be maybe more akin to what's in the environment design, or really could work for any of the projects in the class. Just kind of an evolution of the colorization process that I want to show you. And this again assumes that you're not working with a tablet. So if you don't have a tablet, you can still pull off a lot of really nice painting effects just by working with a mouse and some of the tools available in Photoshop. This would be maybe an image I would start with for a project. It's a more detailed sketch. It's more kind of an environment, but again, it could be for really just think of this sketch as whatever the subject matter of an assignment is. You could approach it this way. So what would happen is when I open my sketch from a photo or a scan, you're going to see again it's going to be on its own layer. And what we're doing in this class is working in layers, and so I would of course create a new layer to paint on, and you might approach it as doing like a flat color layer. In some of the videos I've done like a flat color layer where you put in like your solid colors. If your dinosaur is going to be blue, then you would paint it in blue, and then you might do your shrubs or the plants here in green. And then put that in a multiply layer so it brings in the color underneath. So that might be the way you approach that, and that's all well and good, and it's kind of a good way to start out with these projects, but we want to build on our skills and what we know how to do with this. And so that's really what this demo is going to be about. So again, I'm working on one layer here with all the different colors, and I'm going to have, in this image I'm going to have some water, I'm going to have some sand for the shore here, I'm going to have the green of the shrubs and the bushes, I'm going to have the green of the palm fronds and the color of the trees. So I'm going to have several different elements, and I could do those all on one layer, but what I want to do is show you another way that gives you more flexibility later on in the process. So what I like to do is, as I get further along in these types of projects, is really think about them a little more to start out with. So think about the kind of objects you have. Again, we have the dinosaur statue here. So that's one object. So maybe it would be helpful to keep that object separate from everything else. And then I have this island. That's its own object. The shoreline kind of becomes its own object. These bushes, think of those as one object. And then so what I can do is, again, still working on a layer, I can go in and do my color on top of this layer. And again, this is a more detailed sketch, so it gives me a little bit more to go with as I'm painting a little more of that outline. And again, I'm working on a separate layer. Now right now I've got the layer mode set to normal. If I want to see the sketch underneath, I'll go to multiply, and that lets me see everything a little bit better. And I'm going to go through this pretty quickly and do this part. So the drawing again it's tough to paint and draw with a mouse. You can do it, but it's not the easiest thing in the world to do. And that's where I like to kind of work in short strokes. So if I need to undo something, I only undo little bits of the work. Like if I get out of line, if I want to undo that, I only get rid of this line that I just screwed up on. I don't have to undo everything. So that's why when you're working like this, it's good to work in little bursts, I guess. That way if you do screw up, you can fix it and still keep all your other work intact. There's that. and I'm not going to be super precise on this just yet, just so we can kind of keep this demo moving along. But I like to do a good outline, and then on the inside, when you get that good thick outline there, you can kind of cover the inside of it really quickly. Alright, so there's that much of the dinosaur, and then we've got its tail over here, or her tail. So I'm going to quickly go in. And in this case, I'm not going to try to stay in the lines necessarily. You know, what I might have done is gone to the edge of this and painted around the bottom edge. But in this case, I'm going to pretend like that tree is not there and just go ahead and complete this the way it would be in real life. Think about the actual space that would occupy. So now we've got the dinosaur and the tail. And if we look at it in the normal mode, we just have the solid color that make those up. Okay, we've got them on their own layer now. Alright, so now what I want to do is I want to think about, okay, what else do we have? We have the water area, and we have this big area of foliage, bushes, shrubs, whatever they are. I want to keep those separate, you know, so I don't have to go in and try to come right up against. If I'm on the same layer, I don't have to come in and try to match these edges up perfect. What I'd like to be able to do is just paint underneath all that stuff and not screw up the blue. So what that means is I need a new layer. I'm going to create a new layer. It's on top. Next thing I want to do is I want to double click on this to rename it, so I can keep, because I'm going to have a bunch of layers, I want to keep track of them. So I'm going to call this bushes, and I'm going to call this dino. That way, as I'm glancing at my layer palette, I can see what I'm doing. Another option, another thing you can do is if you right click on the little thumbnail here, you can make that bigger, so you can get a bigger idea of what your layers look like. So that's right click on top of one of the layers, and you can change to small, medium, and large, or no thumbnails. Alright, so I've got this new layer called bushes, and what I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to basically fill all this back here right with green. Okay, and I could use my brush the same way I've done everything and paint that, but I'm going to turn the dinosaur off and get that on my way so I can see what I'm actually doing here. Like I say, I could go in with my brush and paint that shape in. I can get a good small brush, get some of these sharper edges a little bit more, and get a really small brush and try to do some of these really sharp little areas here. Like do that, and maybe do that. Like that's kind of a thin one, so you need a smaller brush. Okay, so you could do it that way, but I want to show you another way to select areas to fill with color. So we'll go ahead and just clear that brush layer of everything. And what you want to use for this is you're going to make sure you're on your brush layer where you want the green to be, and you're going to select the lasso tool in this case. Or actually, let's select the, if I look at this, this is a lot of angles, right? So the lasso tool, what that does is it lets you, let me zoom out here, I've got something activated. Well, what's the deal? Okay, I had something activated there, I don't know what it was. So you just click around until things work. The lasso tool, you can freeform draw a shape. So what I could do is I could go in and with the lasso tool start to map out this shape, and what you see is I get these crisper crisper lines here, right? So I can select this and go select areas. Okay, so I've got a selection. What I can do is I can fill that selection with a color. The way you do that is you pick your color, and then you go to Edit, Fill, and pick foreground color if it's not selected, and hit OK, and there you go. So now I've got this edge that's a lot sharper than I could have done with the lasso with the brush tool by using the lasso tool. And what I do want to do is, you see how this is jagged here? That's because it's called stair stepping, and what that is, it's because of something called anti-aliasing. Let's not talk about that yet, but just know that up here at the top you could turn anti-alias off, and it's off now. If you turn it on when you make a selection, what happens is you get a softer edge there on the side where it blends a little better. It's not quite so harsh. When you zoom out at normal size, you don't notice it as much. But this way, by selecting my areas to fill with color this way instead of painting over that entire shape, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a much crisper edge. So that's just the lasso tool. Again, you just click, drag, and draw. And whatever shape you draw out, you can fill with color by going to Image or go at Edit, Fill, and fill it with whatever your foreground color is, which is the color you've got selected here. That also shows up down here in your tool palette. This block on the top here, that's your foreground color. Okay, so hit that and it fills that shape. Now this is, like I said, it's more angular. So what I can also do is there's the polygonal lasso tool. The way it works is you click, drag to the next point where you want to change the direction of the lasso, click and click, and everywhere you want this line direction to change, you click. And then when you're finished, to complete a lasso, either the polygonal one or the lasso tool, you just double click and it completes that shape. Okay, so in this case I've got so many of these sharper edges here. What I want to do is go in and I can click, and again I'm using my drawing, my pencil line, to make it easier, because if I can select within that, I can kind of fake some detail. And real quickly I can go in and select some pretty good sized chunks of this. Now what I like to do is select chunks. I'm not trying to select everything all at once. And what that allows for is, let's say I go in and select something and spend a lot of time selecting my area, get it just right, just the way I want it. It's easy to screw that up and double click sometimes and make, get rid of your selection, and then all that time you spent, you've lost. Like I misselected it, so the time I spent, I've lost. So what I want to do is, I just like to kind of take my time and work in small bits here, particularly around the edge, because again I can go back and once I get a good edge around this stuff, I can select that interior more. And I also like to zoom up as I'm working. So if you zoom up and you click around and you want to move on to another part of the page, if you hold down while you're still dragging, don't double click, but if you hold down the space bar, you'll see it changes to the hand. That will let you go in and drag on the page while not getting rid of your lasso, while not releasing your lasso. So let's just say I've got this much selected here, here, and then there's the start. I'll double click, it completes it, and now I've filled that shape. Okay, and now what I've got is I've got two different sets of shapes. I've got the grass layer and the dino layer. If I click on brushes and hold that palette down, what I can do is I can drag and swap the places of those different layers. Okay, so this is a tool you might want to use as you're making your selections. And what you got to do is you got to kind of decide what areas you want to select on their own layer and which ones you want to keep separate. Okay, so I'm not going to show you how to select anymore, but what I would do is I'd go in and select all these different areas. And again, you could use the lasso tool, you could use the polygon tool. Maybe you need a rectangle, use the rectangle tool, an elliptical tool. All these are ways that you can make selections, and once you've got a selection, you can fill it with a color. Okay, so let's jump ahead a little bit now and move to this. And what we'll see is, okay, let's jump ahead a little bit now. Okay, let's jump ahead a little bit now to a version where I've gone in and I've used these different selection methods to create these shapes. Like you can look here around Gertie, and what I did is I zoomed up pretty big on that, and you can see where I've made a a fairly wobbly painting around that to fill it up, and that's where I use the brush, right? And then you can see back here on these the bushes, you can see it's a much crisper, straighter edge. Okay, because I was using that polygon select tool. And then I kind of did the same on the tree trunks and on the palm leaves. I've got this little island area here, and I've got the sand here, the water, and the sky. And what that looks like over here in my layer palette is I can go in, and I've named them also, most of them here. So the island, I can turn that off and get rid of it. It's on its own layer, so I can work on it by itself. I've got the sand, which I think is up on top of everything, so I'll get rid of that. I've got the palm fronds, I'll get rid of those. I've got a couple in the back that are separate. The way I did these were, you can see they butt up against one another, but I know they're in the background, so I want them to be a little darker. So I put those on their own layer behind it. And again, if you understand the concept of why I'm doing this, then you'll kind of start to understand how to use this to get your drawings done. And this still may be more complex than some of you are going to do in terms of the drawing or the information in your drawing. But I could turn the tree trunks off, I could turn this off, I could turn that off, I can turn Gertie off, I can turn more tree trunks, and again I separated tree trunks out depending on where they lie in the illustration. Like some of them you can see appear behind the bushes, and some appear in front of the bushes but behind the island here, or they appear behind the dinosaur. Okay, so I'm trying to think about what layers or what objects are in front or behind other objects, and that's tricky sometimes, and sometimes you just got to play around with that and see what works. But again, that's where spend a lot of time playing and experimenting with this. You'll really, and once you really pick this up, every project gets a whole lot easier, and you're not focusing on how to do things if you know why to do things. So once you know how to do it, then you can do all the fun creative stuff, and the rest of it becomes easy. So kind of that's the advantage of having things on their own layer. In this case, instead of having everything like on one layer, like let's say these were all kind of flattened into one layer. Let's go to layer and merge visible. What that does, it puts it all on one layer like that. That's great. If this is all I want to do, That's fine, and I can use my mode layer or layer mode and adjust it and get something pretty good. And this, we see the detail from the drawing come through. That's great and all. But now, what if I want to change the color of the dinosaur? What if I don't like this blue and want a purple? Well, then what I got to do is I have to go on this layer, change it back to normal, go on this layer, and go in and change this color. And that can be tricky. If you got a very complex drawing, it can be tricky to change that. But here's another advantage of having things in layers. If it's its own layer, what I can do is, so let's say we want to change the color of the dinosaur. The only thing on this layer is that blue. I'll select that layer. I'll go to the image menu and go to adjustments and go to hue and saturation. Hue is the color, right? So the color here is blue. Blue is the hue of the paint on this layer. I can change that by dragging this hue slider. So really quickly I can go in and make the dinosaur, instead of a blue, I can make it more of a magenta. If I want it really saturated, I could crank that up and it becomes really kind of garish. Or if I want to back it off a little bit so it's not so bright, I can take the saturation down. I can make it really light or really dark. But real quickly, what you see is if you've got something on a layer, I can go in and do hue and saturation. I can change this to purple in a couple seconds. Then let's say I want to change the sky color. I got the sky on its own layer. I can change that in a couple seconds. Let's say I want to do these the bushes in a different color, a darker green maybe. In a couple seconds I can do that. Let's say I want to change the water to something bluer. And maybe a little bit more intense. So really quickly, by setting these things up in layers, in under a minute, I've gone in and totally changed the color and tweaked my color values. And then I can always undo all of that to a certain degree. Okay? And if maybe I just wanted one of those changes. Okay? But that's another benefit to having things on their own layer, is you can kind of tweak colors to start off with. Okay, so that's the first part of this video. I'm going to cut it here so you can really think about creating layers and making your selections and think of ways to make selections. Again, if you're fine drawing with a mouse or drawing with a tablet, you can just draw all your shapes on their own layers. You don't have to do, it may be not as difficult for you. But this is, again, the concept, the idea that we're working with here is what's important. The idea of working on layers and keeping things separate so you can maintain control over them while keeping other parts of your illustration from being altered. That's really important. So that's the first part of this demo. There'll be a second part when I'll show you another way to use these layers to help your painting process.